I am very privileged this morning to have a special guest with us today, and Jason Georgie. Jason Georgie is our global field CTO. I think just looking down the list, I know pretty much most of you, but for any that don't, I am our SASE commercial lead here in Western Europe, UKI. Hope all of you are well and enjoyed, for those that attended Ignite last week, fantastic showing as well. This is very much our sort of partner community. I can see all very much on the bridge today. But the topic of what we've been running in terms of is a series of webinars is today very much SASE in a unified solution. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, but you know, we've as I say, we're very lucky. We've got Jason Georgie here today. He's our global field CTO. Jason's been in the role for us for 4 years. Fantastic resource, works globally, so he's pretty much speaking to every blue chip company, or most of our top house accounts here at Palo Alto Networks, about the future of how networking security converges delivered into a SASE architecture. But Jason, we'll pretty much jump straight in. Hope you're well, bud. Good weekend and all, first and foremost.
Yeah, thank you, Spence.
But I thought we'd just have a little bit more of a chat just around what you're seeing and hearing in the market right now, okay? Because it was interesting, you know, the topic of this is SASE in a unified solution. And, you know, a question that got posed to me on Ignite on Thursday by a partner was that, is SASE just not about, you know, vendors taking more in terms of the solution stack and commoditizing that and putting that into a commercial framework, right? And I think there's actually a huge importance here as to why we're seeing convergence, you know, sort of certainly within the IT market right now. So what perhaps the question, you know, just opening to you is to, why do you think that the convergence is such a driver for businesses right now? Why are businesses looking at networking security? We're specifically looking at remote access and how security networks delivered from the branch into a single architecture. Just give us some of that sort of your feedback in terms of, you know, going back now over the 4 years that you've seen. I mean, and prior to that, you being a Zscaler as well, you've seen huge evolution right now unraveling in front of your own eyes and that of our customers. So if you just perhaps give us you know, what you've kind of seen as to where we are today, as to why a unified solution in SASE is becoming such an important way of thinking in the age that we are today.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me, Spence. I appreciate it. And thank you to the partner community that we value so much here at Palo. You're key to our success, and I do appreciate everything that you guys help us with on a day-to-day basis. So thank you all. But to your point, Spence, you're exactly right that convergence is a key theme around, you know, what SASE is trying to deliver. But even before I was, you know, in this space, I spent a long time on the customer side. And at the time when I was at GE, we were trying to build a capability that was delivering what SASE is meant to as a unified platform. The reality was there was no such thing as a SASE platform or even anything unified. Everything was kind of a point product. But the idea was to push products and services that are delivering security, remote access, and things to a scalable and kind of an off-net type presence that was able to create a little bit of an air gap, if you will, between the organization and the users accessing resources. So whether that meant now providing a more efficient path between those users that are either sitting at home or in a branch to these new cloud and SaaS destinations, or for inbound access, being able to scale that in a way that was taking that capacity requirement off of the inbound gateway sitting in a data center. It was, you know, how do we scale this? How do we push these services to the edge for whatever reason we need them to do? Now, though, you know, fast forward 11 years or so, you know, we're in a place where SASE platforms are actually a thing. You know, it's not a line that is a marketing term. Platforms have become, you know, what other previous vendors really wanted them to be, which was, hey, we've got this array of capability, and we want to be able to deliver that as a service to you. Now, the problem with so many vendors for so long was they didn't actually integrate them, so they put their label on it, call it a platform, wasn't really true. But now when we look at, some of the capabilities out there, the whole idea is how do we actually get better and smarter at what we do to drive efficiencies? So to your specific question around what are we seeing? Why are we seeing it? There's not a CXO that I talk to today that isn't thinking about how they can simplify the environment, get a little more agile with it, and drive efficiency from a cost and operations perspective, right? And so thinking about how use cases around access are, let's just like SASE, very simple. You got users, they work anywhere, trying to access resources anywhere they happen to be. How do we get them there as securely and efficiently as possible? Let's look at where all of that access comes from and where it's going. So branch users, home users, traveling users, what are the security stacks that they use, the remote access stacks that they use, the security stacks to the internet and whatever else. So it could be a proxy, it could be an application gateway, it could be so many things, depending on where that destination is now. If we can unify just access between users and whatever they're consuming as far as a digital resource goes, it makes things so much simpler from a user experience perspective, right? I've got the same type of policy, whether I'm sitting in the branch or at home, accessing my set of resources rather than several different stacks, but also from a policy management and audit perspective, right? I think the thing that irritates and triggers auditors so much is the fact that we only know what we know. We only see what we have visibility into. So anything that's outside of that policy or that capability becomes a concern. Unifying these things into a single capability means we have full visibility of where users are and what they're accessing. That means we can manage it and control the access from there. That is something that's just not been present. Even with some other SASE capabilities out there right now, we have a situation where a ZTNA solution, as an example, will handle part of the remote access use case, but still not all of it, right? Because certain capabilities are designed to support certain traffic flows and things like that. What about the others? So now it's like, okay, even with certain SASEs, I've got a capability for remote access, but it's not complete, so I have another solution. And then there's a security gap, so I have to add a point product to fill the security gap. It just becomes a challenge. So our perspective here at Palo is not just unify, but unify it in a way that allows you to get to a really good place as far as what your stack looks like, what your management looks like, and how they consume it, right? As far as like operationally and from a cost perspective.
Yeah, no, and so one of the things that sort of just cast in my mind, so there's a couple of questions that were posed again to me. So is very much in the sense of, conversations that you're currently having with our customers and prospects alike, in terms of when we're talking about that kind of unified approach. You're talking about architectural, a kind of real paradigm in the whole sort of shift in terms of architecturally to how businesses think about how security networking is ultimately delivered. But typically, when you're speaking to customers, where do you see those conversations pivot in terms of actually how do they start? How are they native? And what I mean by that is that in terms of, is it a single kind of use case? And if so, is that what we're really sort of focused on and this is a bit of a challenge that we've got in terms of what we really want from our partner community, is to be thinking kind of long term, thinking kind of, not necessarily so point product or use case driven, but more holistically, more thinking about kind of the long term, where the customer can progress to. Do you sort of, in terms of your own sort of, I suppose the question really to you is that where do you see customers in terms of their own journey as atypical? And, how typically do they start their journey towards SASE in terms of it being, that kind of shift? And how radical do you see it, or perhaps not so? Typically in terms of where we currently are today to where we are tomorrow, what do you see in terms of what is, let's say, as I say, atypical to a to an early in opportunity move to SASE? How do you see that typically in terms of, the conversations that you have with our customers?
Good question, Spence. And the reality is there's no one right answer to how you start with SASE. And that's the biggest thing I do try to articulate to somebody looking into how do I take this to the next step, is it's whatever you need to do to start, right? And so with the onset of the pandemic, obviously, SASE was driven by remote access by home users. And even taking a step back from that, like looking at where SASE actually came from, in August, I guess, yeah, it was August of 2019, Gartner created, or no, I'm sorry, 2020. Well, I guess whenever it was, but Gartner created a market at the end of the day, right? And the whole idea was we're going to converge these networking and security capabilities in a way that makes sense for consumers to, really apply it in a more unified way. But we were educating a lot of customers at the time around what SASE is trying to do, why it makes sense for your organization. Then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, everything got scooped up and was like, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to scale remote access. We need it more secure. We need to do all of these things. It's the term I coined at the time was work as an activity, not a place. And so, how do we actually get more unified around how we provide access to things? So that was the key driver to SASE, because as organizations were looking at how do I scale remote access, what's a good VPN replacement, et cetera, they fell upon, okay, here are these ZTNA solutions. But then everybody that looked at that said, oh, look, this is part of a broader SASE platform. So then the discussion evolves into, okay, now that you've got this platform in place, how can you use it to handle additional use cases, extract greater business value over the long term because of what you're actually using now to solve this one initial use case? As time has evolved and we're out of reactive mode from the pandemic, the entry point to SASE has shifted to be, again, whatever you need it to be. So now with hybrid work and users going back into branches, we are seeing an uptick in SD-WAN, right? So those organizations that kind of left the branches be because nobody was working in them and our focus had to be elsewhere, scaling applications, scaling remote access, things like that. Now that people are actually coming back into the branch, it's more like, how can we make that more efficient? Right? How can we optimize the WAN? How can we optimize branch connectivity, both from a path perspective, so users getting more efficient access to their applications, but also a cost perspective? Do we still need private line connectivity? And I always couch that by understanding that Europe is a completely different beast than the US when it comes to connectivity, MPLS versus ISP and things like that. In the US, it is a much different conversation because private line connectivity is so expensive still, 10x typically. The cost of 10 meg of ISP connectivity versus 10 meg of MPLS connectivity is roughly a 10x differential. So they're now looking to recoup some of those costs, those that haven't embraced SD-WAN as yet. Other use cases are really around proxy replacement. So we have an internet security capability. We need it to be better than what we have, whether that it means on-premise and scaling enough because we're going to start doing SSL decryption on as much as we can, or the fact that internet security itself is limited in what it can do. How do we expand what it's doing today? An example would be a lot of customers that wind up running SWIGs or secure web gateways for web traffic also wind up having an application gateway, something that's layer 7 based for access to third-party applications or third parties in general, or just non-web applications on the internet themselves. How do they consolidate that down now to one internet security solution? So that's another use case, is just improving internet security, proxy replacement, things like that. SaaS security. So SaaS has exploded, and the reason for that, we called it the consumerization of IT and shadow IT for a long time, going back about, I guess, 8 years or so. When SaaS initially exploded, people could just, with a credit card, subscribe to a SaaS application. And now it's, out there. It's being used by the company. IT has no visibility into that, things like that. With the onset of the pandemic, that created a new shadow IT, if you will, or shadow IT 2.0, that was, we have users working, applications that were in-house were not scaling for remote access, right? And everybody accessing them over a long haul VPN connection, things like that, where they could access them directly from home, quite simply. So now we had this explosion of SaaS that is needing to get under control by IT again. So, or information security, to at least get visibility. Where are our users going? Are these applications we want to sanction? Are they applications we want to tolerate or block? Because we've provided another service that's supposed to do the same type of job. So SaaS security is another one, especially around SaaS security posture management, right? The ability to get better and smarter about these SaaS applications we're accessing. And then I would say the last use case is around third parties. So inbound third party access that we have to, or our customers have to provide to their, partners, joint ventures, consultants, however we define a third party, they need inbound access to applications that are critical to our business typically. And how do we do that successfully in a way that also doesn't expose those applications to risk? So the use cases that this really kind of started with when it was created as a market, remote access. Now that we're out of that reactive mode, WAN optimization, protecting users from the internet and better internet security, SaaS access and security, and then third-party access. And it's really wherever they want to start based on what they need to accomplish for their business, and then start using that same platform for more of these use cases, right? It's the ability then to really kind of extract greater value out of it because it can handle so many of them.
Yeah, and I think you touched on some really good points there. And I think if I could just look at where we're talking, you mentioned there about there is a battle that rages between MPLS versus internet, and some of that is around perception of cost, agility, flexibility, easy to be able to deploy internet breakout from sites. It's certainly a driver that we're seeing. Certainly is organizations perhaps shift to, you mentioned just in there about the idea of work being, an activity, not a place. And then actually it's kind of how businesses are sort of looking at sort of the future of how the office. And we're seeing a huge rise here in London, for example, in managed service builds. So, the fact that I can have more agility to be able to put users based on perhaps a seasonal trend or perhaps project-based environment and have people, but then I also want my IT to be as scalable as my, my operations in terms of, where I place users when working in offices. So that's obviously been, as I say, for us, it's been a driver for SASE. But kind of just one of just things I wanted just to sort of pin this to is that we're talking now about applications being highly dispersed, users now obviously being very transient between working from office, working from anywhere, right? What's your opinion in terms of what you're seeing around user UX, user experience, right? And how important is that now to a SASE solution? So when we're thinking about, as we kind of say, is that the agility, flexibility that we need to be able to provide IT operations, networking security delivered. What do you see in terms of the conversations that you're having around UX, user experience? And when we're certainly thinking about refactoring of applications into SaaS, into public cloud, it can become slightly daunting in terms of how do I ensure my users are productive wherever they are and they stay productive and that I can identify when issues occur. As I say, where do you see that really in terms of its importance now in terms of SASE stack, as it were?
I would say it's probably and I don't know if even this is the right mentality of a lot of customers, but it's as important as the security side. Yeah. So user experience has become absolutely critical. It's a CIO imperative with most organizations that I talk to, ensuring that yes, productivity is increased, when we go down this path. And it's really around the fact that because users are working, to your point, everywhere, right? There's no assumption of where they are going to be working to access an application. Efficient access has to be as key as possible. So ensuring that they get to that application as quickly as possible so that work does not drop off has become so critical that organizations have actually started shifting away from certain SASE vendors because they can't assure a good user experience or ensure a good user experience. And so, when we turn back the clock on how Palo delivered Prisma Access as an example, even before SASE was a capability defined by Gartner, it was around how do we ensure users get to their destination as efficiently as possible in a unified type way. So we went down the path of delivering the service over hyperscalers rather than building a cloud. The challenge that we see with so many out there is that they have these clouds that they've built. These other providers have built these clouds, and it becomes an ingress and egress out of the same cloud pop type scenario, no matter where users work or what they're accessing, which is perhaps more efficient for certain internet applications or web browsing in general, which is how a lot of these vendors got their start, right? They were proxies in the cloud, if you will. So yeah, just push that service out to a cloud data center or a data center that's not mine. It'll be more efficient, et cetera. As we're now talking about critical traffic flows, and we started going down this path with the onset of cloud delivered remote access or ZTNA, it is how do we ensure that user's path to any destination, not just websites, but to SaaS apps, to cloud and VPC apps and data center apps, as efficient as possible. So leveraging something like a hyperscaler that includes connectivity, interconnected fiber between edge and compute off to the destination means we should be able to give users a really good path that eliminates some of the middle mile variability, giving them fast, efficient access backed by SLAs over fiber, all good things. It doesn't matter though without visibility. And that's a key that every single SASE vendor has to be able to provide, is what does that path look like now? So if we're talking about user experience, how important it is, how we get users from point A to point B, what's going on in between that, right? The ability to see that and identify anything that could go wrong has become so critical that SASE providers that don't have a digital experience management capability baked into their solution are just not even realistically considered. This isn't just something where we're pushing a typical remote access service or a browsing service to a cloud edge. If it's disrupted, we can live, right? We'll get by for a little while. Not when we're starting to pass critical connectivity, not when some of these users are going to be home permanently, right? So there's no ability for them to just go into an office if remote access doesn't work, right? Because with one of the things that we saw with the pandemic was the ability of organizations to expand their talent pool outside of the metro that they operate in or key metro areas. They could go global, right? They could hire people working from anywhere. Well, when you start doing that, it's a good thing for your ability to acquire good talent. It's a tough thing if connectivity is poor, and because you can't just say, oh, you know what, VPN, remote access, it's not working, just go into the office today. There might not be an office within hundreds of miles from where these users are working. So now the ability to say, here's the visibility we have between users anywhere they work, any application they're accessing, every segment in between allows now companies to say, where did the breakdown happen? Let's go ahead and remediate and resolve it, triage it, and ensure user experience isn't impacted for the next group of users. So then if I talk about what SASE was meant to solve earlier in our discussion, it's users anywhere, applications anywhere, as securely and efficiently as possible. All great, but you need the visibility. And that visibility has to be end-to-end, segment by segment, down the application delivery path. So when things do go wrong, this is technology, it will. We can't assume everything's going to be perfect. We can quickly do something about it, including things like even self-service, where a user can say or see by a pop-up on their endpoint that my Wi-Fi signal strength's degraded, right? Because I took my device outside to work on a nice day, or I accidentally somehow attached to my neighbor's SSID in their home, or my broadband carrier is having an issue regionally, right? There's a regional outage or a regional service disruption, something they need to be aware of. Instead of calling IT, hey, my apps are slow, we can identify that quickly. So, user experience has become so critical, Spencer. It's just as important for a lot of organizations as the security being delivered itself.
No, thank you. So we're almost there, but I've had one question. I've just had a couple of texts from a couple of people I know are on the line, and this is probably the most common question that we get within our IT channel, right? Or certainly amongst our closest channel partners, is and it is one that you get a lot, but here we go. So it's the case of Prisma Access. Is it really cloud, right? And is it kind of, you can't just kind of, the whole adage of, you can't just put files in a hyperscaler and call it cloud, it's or call it Netflix, right? Sort of that kind of analogy that was previously been used. So just to sort of close, really in truth, what's your kind of common response when, customers kind of give you this blurb about us? How do you typically retort to that?
I love this one. I really do. And I had to take a sip of water before I answer this because it always makes me chuckle a little bit. First of all, you're getting this delivered as a service. So first thing is, why does it matter what the architecture is behind it? If we're providing you a service that scales with SLA backed, capability, what does it matter? It shouldn't, because you're consuming it as a service. Do you know how Salesforce is run? Do you know how our competitors are run? They've literally stacked servers in locations that is a cloud. It's just an off-net data center, right? It's somebody else's data center running servers, 2U servers, hundreds of them in a cluster. That's their cloud. So when we start talking about is what we're doing really a cloud? When we're using virtualized services, microservices, containerized services, yes, it is cloud. It is driven by APIs, right? When we need to scale a customer instance, it's a software change. It's an API call to scale up an environment. It is using hyperscaler capability around compute processing, right? So here's one of the best examples I can use, and I know we're about a minute away from wrapping this up, but if you think about SSL decryption and the security services that have to go into security inspection, that is looked at as, oh, this sounds great. But it's gonna impact the user experience. It's gonna slow things down too much. The Prisma Access SLA on security inspection is under 10 milliseconds of latency added with SSL decrypt turned on. So that means SSL decryption happens, wildfire inspection, threat prevention, DNS security, URL filtering, all of the services, DLP, that are running, they're going to run through that cycle in less than 10 milliseconds. That is 10 times faster than our closest competitor. So again, when it comes to cloud versus, stacking, VMs in a data center like Net or DVD players somewhere and calling it Netflix, one, it shouldn't matter because we're delivering this as a service. Two, if we're delivering it as a service faster than everybody else, who cares what the architecture is behind it? But three, it is truly cloud native. We're using cloud native services all throughout what the capability is and how it's being delivered. So happy for our partners on this call, let's have a conversation. If you want to understand more, if you want to bring me into a customer conversation, I'm here. I'm available as a resource. As most of you know, you've had me in conversations before. Happy to go through this in more detail with our customers.
No, that's fantastic. That's certainly a great way to wrap it up. So, and with that, just thank you very much to everybody joining us this morning. Appreciate it. First thing on a Monday as well. I think we've got a fantastic crowd of people that have joined. As Jason says, if for whatever reason you wish to know more, you really want to understand perhaps in further detail any of the points raised today, please reach out to anyone across either your distributors or directly to your channel business manager or myself, and we'll happily sort of schedule a follow-up with you. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you, Jason, and wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.